I've been trying for 10 years to wake up, and nothing's happened. No movement, no spiritual awakening. I've been trying for 20 years, 30 years. I've done all the things, read all the teachers, watched all the videos, done the practices, but I'm not waking up. What's the problem? What's going on here? This is a common complaint or comment I get on my videos. I'd say it's not the most common. It's probably once or twice a week I'll see something like this out of thousands of comments, but it's common enough that I want to address it in detail. I want to address it thoroughly and kind of unpack what I think might be going on in those situations, and some of what goes into forming that perception, some of the mechanics of awakening itself and how it plays into this perception, and maybe a little bit about my own experience and my experience working with a lot of people who are themselves going through awakening and get stuck in these places, these mental loops or these behavior patterns that are kind of stagnant or whatever it is that seems to sort of prevent a shift in identity, and then watching them get unstuck and finding out what it was that was being held on to there. So coming from all of that, hopefully I can offer some guidance here or some encouragement and some practical ideas. So we'll get into it. I don't want to sound callous. I don't want to sound like I don't empathize, like I don't understand the frustration. I do understand the frustration behind these kinds of comments, these sort of pleas sometimes, pleas for something, for some help, for some pointing. I understand, and I understand how uncomfortable that is. At the same time, I have to be completely honest and speak from my own truth and the truth that was realized here, which is not a personal truth. To be honest, it's not a personal truth. It's something that's more obvious than anything in the personal spectrum. It's something that's more obvious than anything that the mind could construct. It's more obvious than any mental fabrication. It's more obvious than my hand in front of my face, if I'm honest. And that is, you can wake up. You absolutely can wake up. It really is available to everyone. And the short circuit, kind of wise cracking way of saying that is, it's your true nature. Of course you have access to your true nature. Now, that doesn't help you to hear that, probably. It may instill a little bit of confidence or something, but it doesn't give you a way or a method. It doesn't explain how, well, sure, okay, if I have access all the time, if it is my true nature, great. Why am I not experiencing it now? Why do I not feel relieved? Why do I not feel in alignment? Why do I feel like I'm struggling with myself? Why do I feel like I'm suffering? And that's a valid question. And that puts the impetus on me to explain it as best I can, unpack it, and give hopefully some guidance. It's a bit not fair to just say, well, you're already there. There's nothing to do and there's nowhere to go. Okay. So spend another 10 years feeling that way? It's not necessary. There are orientations, pointers, practical means, practices, and some suggestions I have that can unstick you, let's say. So first of all, let's just talk about the psychological background or the maybe the conceptual framework of this. And I have to confront this directly because the first movement of awakening, the first shift in the awakening process has to do with thought. It has to do with thought and belief. And it has to do with the binding of thought and belief specifically. Sometimes I'll say to people, especially if they're really conceptual, like they've learned all this sort of Dharma stuff and they have this really nuanced intellectual grasp of it, and yet they haven't had an awakening. Sometimes I'll really emphasize, like, you're totally missing the boat. You can learn everything there is to know about the suttas. You can memorize the Heart Sutra. The Diamond Sutra. You can go on and on and on with that stuff. You can get a degree in it. But if you don't have a shift in identity, if you don't confront the fundamental illusion directly and purposefully and with your own intention to do so, then you're not leaving the driveway. And it's really important to hear that. So I'll emphasize that the first movement of awakening is to move beyond the conceptual. That's about as simply as I can put it. It really is that important. Like, you have to move beyond the conceptual mind. Zen is very clear about this. Zen is about as clear as it gets about this. It's so clear, it's so direct that they don't even waste time with words. most of the time. If you come in and you're on fire with the Dharma and you have a Zen teacher who's adept, he's going to hand you the koan, mu. What is mu? Or maybe he'll hand you the koan, he or she will hand you the koan. What is the sound of one hand? Or maybe even who are you? Or what are you? Where are you? Depending on their style and so forth. But they're going to hand you something that immediately may not move you beyond the conceptual, but what it will do is immediately it will render your tendency to grab onto concepts inert. If you want to continue with that practice authentically, then you can't use concepts. That's it. I'm taking them away from you. I've taken them away from you, right? That's how it feels. Now, I understand the first time you confront this, the first time you come into contact with mu, I see this when I make a video about mu, for instance. It's the Zen koan. What is mu, essentially? There's a story behind it. It's the first case in the Mumonkan and so forth. But when I make a video about this, some people really are moved by it and really get it. And other people, they just keep wanting to ask. It's like, I know it's not anything, but is it this? Is it emptiness? Is it this or that? And they want to compare it to other things, or they'll just state, oh, it's emptiness, or it's that or this. And both of those tell me like you haven't really actually digested what I'm saying. Mu is not anything about what you think mu is about. Who you are isn't anything to do with who you think you are. Nisargadatta said it clearly, and his teacher said it to him clearly. You have to go beyond what you take yourself to be. You have to question what you take yourself to be to find out what you really are. Again, the first movement. That's the first shift. It's critical. This is what we're pointing to. So if I were to extrapolate that or apply that to this statement and the deeply held belief that I've been on a path for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, done all the things, done all the meditations, and I just can't wake up. I am not waking up. If I extrapolate what I just said about moving beyond concepts to that, or apply it to that, and hand it to you, and say, what does that look like to you right now, in this moment? You've read Eckhart Tolle by now, right? You know, there's just the present, just now, okay? So in just now, what meaning does it have to talk about what's happened for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? For me too. What if I talk about what happened yesterday, a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago? Does it change one iota this? Does it mar this? Does it alter this? It doesn't do anything at all. Any more than if I say a monster, attacked me yesterday when I was walking home from work or something. It's imagination. It's thought stuff, right? So any story you have about yourself, no matter how deeply held it is or how much you want to hold on to it, it really is a story. Now, I understand sometimes some people would say that's sort of invalidating someone's story and whatever. Well, I'm already making the assumption, if you watch my videos, you come to this channel, you've read my book, I already make the assumption, and I say this in videos and I said it in my book, that you want to wake up. If you want to wake up, I'm not going to pull any punches. Yeah. I can work in that avenue with people along their storyline and what's going on and so forth. And sometimes it's really important to do that, to not just set the story aside and point directly to presence. Interestingly, that even comes into play importantly after awakening with shadow work, things like that. It really does matter. You need to sometimes backtrack and find out where these threads of identity have formed themselves and why, you just keep coming back to this over and over and over, this vasana, this sticking point. But that's not here. That's not now. When we're talking about awakening, again, the first movement is to move beyond concepts, to move beyond your deeply held beliefs. Now, those deeply held beliefs may not be that I can't wake up. They may be that, whatever your Christian beliefs are, or whatever your Buddhist beliefs are, or whatever your beliefs are about the scientific and materialistic truth of the body, the mind, the brain, the default mode network, whatever you're using to stabilize yourself in mind, in thought, you have to confront it directly one way or another. So, and the reason I say this first, before anything else I'm going to say, is if you overlook this part, then all the other stuff won't work. If you overlook the symbol, it actually is very simple and fundamental truth about awakening, that you have to confront the identity structure as you take it to be right now. And it's going to be bound in thoughts, and there's going to be a strong narrative there, or multiple narratives. that hold that clinging to thought in place. It doesn't hold you in place. It doesn't hold a life in place or a world, because those are sort of imaginary when you see through thought. What it's holding in place is a tendency to kind of return, to loop back to a thought about me. And strangely, by doing that, we overlook again and again the sense of being a subject, which is very strange. This is why we talk about the I am sense sometimes. The I am sense is actually overlooked until it's not. When it's not overlooked, it's such a surprise. There's a famous story in Zen called Inyadata and her head. She thought she lost her head. She went around telling everybody she lost her head, and everyone said, "You're crazy, it's on top of your shoulders." And she said, "No, I can't find it. They tied her up because they thought she was crazy. Finally, someone hit her in the head, and the pain of it woke her up. And as bizarre as that story is, it really does point to this strange truth that by looking outward into thoughts, stories, narratives, the past, all of it, and the future, and who we think we are, and our struggles, our problems, and our solutions that we think we need to really cling on to, by looking out into that all the time, we're always overlooking something, that sense of subjectivity, which is actually more of a activity, subjectification. It's ongoing. It's the looping of thought. It's the re-referencing of that story or narrative again and again, which reinforces or seems to uphold a presupposed self. But again, strangely, we don't look for the self. That's why sometimes just looking for what you think you are is key. Looking for where you think you are, or even resting in the most primary experience right now. Any of those approaches may work. But once you sort of land there, the whole system just realigns itself, and it's obvious. It's so obvious. All of the prioritization we give to thoughts and beliefs and narratives and past and future, and how little prioritization we give to this presence, it just flips over. All of a sudden, there's just presence. It's so obvious. The mind often gets very calm. There may be thoughts, but they're not specters. They're not demons anymore. And that's the shift in identity. And the experience of I becomes something like infinite I am sense, or I am everything. It's something like that. It's not a conceptual thing, though. It's an experience. And sometimes there may not even really be a sense of I, just this sense of clarity. And then sometimes people will name it things like awareness. But the clarity is primary, and that's the key, right? So, to loop back, so to speak, to what I was saying a moment ago about having to go beyond thought. There are different ways to do this. Koans, getting into the one-pointed sort of approach. And what that does is it sets those thoughts aside again and again and again, long enough until there can be a reset. And the reset will surprise you. It has to surprise you. It just will. Because what you're taking yourself to be, including the one who has that story you're sure of, is not what you are. Definitely not what you are. You're not someone who has been stuck for 10 years. That's just not who you are. You're not someone who's been victimized. You're not someone who has been the victimizer. You're not someone who's guilty. You're not someone who feels tons of shame and you don't know how to get rid of it. You're not someone who is dependent upon a therapist to feel better. These are aspects of the psyche. They're aspects of consciousness, but that's not who you are. Definitely not who you are. None of it is who you are, because the who I am tendency to define self and redefine self and defend the definition is so small, if you think about it, right? If you just keep thinking about the one thing you're not, the one thing you don't have, and even if it's awakening, you're really experiencing a very narrow version of even thought reality, right? It's filtering out so many other possibilities, even just in the space of thought and consciousness. So it's critical to confront those beliefs and ask yourself, why do I believe that? How strongly do I believe it? How sure of it am I? So if that's your fundamental overriding belief that I've, whatever it is, whatever your story is, I've done this, and this, and I haven't woken up. Don't just tell yourself, oh, that's not true then. Angelo is saying, just disregard it and tell myself it's not true. I don't think so, because it's pretty sticky. So it may require a little bit of inquiry into the nature of what is holding it in place. And that may loosen it up until one of these techniques will work. So consider just questioning it, maybe even writing this down. But ask yourself, what do I get out of that belief? What does that belief provide me? Right? Because the belief sounds like all I want is to wake up. But I promise you, there's a mixed agenda there. There. If you look, you'll find it. I'm sure you want to wake up. We'll get to that. But if you ask the question, you may find that there's part of you that doesn't want to. Why? What is it providing you to keep telling yourself that story? Or any story? Again, this can be uncomfortable to hear, but if you really mean that you want me to point you beyond this is how you got to approach it. Or I don't know if you have to, but it will be helpful. Ask yourself, what am I getting out of continuing to believe the story or narrative? And maybe write it down, brainstorm, sit with it for a day, 2, a week, right? And it could be anything, but it may be along the lines of, I get a feeling of safety from knowing the thoughts, from believing the same thoughts again and again. Even though I know it's uncomfortable, I get a sense of safety from the familiarity. Or it may be something like, I avoid fear. Because when I actually question what's beyond that, or I let that go for a moment, I start to feel fear. So without knowing it, we can actually use those things to sort of sidestep fear, existential fear. So just acknowledging that, if that's the case, is really going to be helpful. So consider asking those types of questions. Then also ask the question, is this really true? How do I, or let me rephrase that. How do I know I'm not awake? Sometimes I'll ask people this and they're like, why are you asking that question? It's so weird. I know it's obvious. I don't have what you have, right? Oh, well, there's a clue. The clue there, if that's your honest answer, is you think awakening has something to do with me, that you're going to get like I got. It has something to do with the way you're hearing my story. But as I've said again and again, it doesn't. It doesn't have anything to do with my story or anyone else's story you've heard. So asking yourself the question can be really helpful. What do I think I'm going to get out of this? Why do I think I'm sure I'm not awake? Right? These will bring you to some information if you really get curious about them. So those are a few questions to ask, but I would really spend some time with this. Really confront that belief. And that may do the trick, actually. If you aggressively confront this belief, or at least, let me say, come at it from different angles. And don't just settle for the same thought that you've had for 10 years that says, I'm not awake. I try everything. You could also look back and see, have I had similar thoughts with other things? Maybe it's not just awakening. Maybe I have thoughts like that with work, with a relationship. Like, maybe, I don't know. It doesn't really work for me. Right? Oh, maybe that's the case. Maybe there's a recurrent theme that, again, is uncomfortable, but it's familiar. And you're trying to apply it to awakening. And then you might really see something interesting, because you can't apply that to awakening. Because the truth of it is that awakening is a statement of natural truth. It's already the case. It's not something you can fail at. It's impossible to fail at awakening because the awakeness is already there. What you can fail at is letting go of thoughts, right? Not that you can fail at that, but you can get good at not letting go of thoughts. It takes work, actually, to hold on to those beliefs and thoughts and try to convince yourself and others that they're true, right? So again, this may feel uncomfortable, but I'm just trying to show you how to confront your own beliefs about this stuff. And that may really do the trick if you can really get under them. Now, this is something I often say when I talk about doing this kind of really direct inquiry work into your beliefs, and that is, be prepared to feel emotion, and maybe specifically fear. You may feel fear. You may even feel anger. You may feel anger listening to me. But you may, if you really start digging, you may find some surprising emotions. Shame, fear, anger, and it may come out of nowhere. If you do, that's okay. It's not just okay, it's good. You don't have to have that happen, but it's not uncommon. If you do, just stop there for a moment and feel what there is to feel. That's it. You don't need to analyze it. You don't need to even really name it. You can if you want, if it helps to say, that's existential fear. It's okay. But don't analyze it. Just feel. And notice that it will pass. It does change. You're not going to feel existential terror like constantly. Your body can't do that. It just won't do that. But you may feel it very intensely for 5 minutes, and your mind might tell you, this is never going to go away. I'm going to be gone forever. I've ruined my mind. All of it, right? The scary thoughts. Those are the ones that make it much harder than it needs to be. Set the thoughts aside and feel. If you start to feel some kind of fear or emotion when you're doing this kind of really direct inquiry. So confront that fundamental belief first and foremost. You're going to have to do that one way or another. And confront the belief, the meta belief, that you need beliefs about yourself. Do you need beliefs about yourself? Do you need to know where you are in relation to something called awakening? Or is that just a bunch of relational thoughts that are not to do with anything specific? When I talk about awakening, it's nothing relational. It's so far beyond thought in a sense. It's bigger, more vast, more fluid, more empty, more full, more intimate. So thoughts can't get around that. So it has nothing to do with the relational sort of thought structures. So that's the first part of what I need to say about this. The other part that I'm going to kind of go over maybe a little bit more efficiently is that there are practical things you can do, of course. And not uncommonly when someone says this to me that they haven't had an awakening and they've been working at it for many years. First couple questions I usually ask, have you worked with a one-on-one with a non-dual facilitator? Like someone who's liberated or someone who's deeply realized and can point you past your own fixations, who will help you confront these beliefs, who has walked this path before, this pathless path, who can feel into what's going on with you energetically and address it directly. Like, it's really valuable. If you can't afford to pay somebody, because some people do this for a living, if you look around, you can find people who will do it pro bono or for free. But again, a lot of people do this for a living, which is, totally fair in my opinion. So it may cost you a little bit to do that, to have a session with somebody, but one session with somebody like that can make a huge difference. Many people wake up with like truly after one session with somebody. I can think of many examples of this. So consider the one-on-one with a facilitator type thing. The second question I usually ask, and often they say they've never done that, right? I'm like, well, there you go. I mean, use your resources. There's resources now that are widely available. Number 2 would be retreat. Go to some kind of retreat. In-person retreat is probably the best, but online retreats are very powerful. People have shifts at online retreats all the time. I hear about them. They tell me. Either way, that's a really good pattern interrupt. A week of sitting, a week of giving your will over to a process that is not defined by you and your ego. That's what it is. That's what a retreat is. And then with good pointing and Q&A mixed into it, it can be really powerful. There are many people who put out good retreats. Adyashanti has great retreats, I don't think he's doing them anymore, but he has a lot of recorded ones that were really good. And I've been to a few of his. His are awesome. That's the only ones coming to mind right now. But there are all kinds of, there's Zen Sesshin retreats. Can't think of any specific teachers, but there are good teachers out there, of course. Vipassana retreats. So put yourself in a setting that's uncomfortable. Do something different. Try something different. Go to a retreat. And then there's all kinds of other possibilities. Psychedelics. If you've never done it and you think it's safe for you to do that, have a history of like mental illness or something that it could be set off by it, give it a shot. It's worked for some people, or at least gets the ball rolling. It opens you to experiences that are far beyond what you thought was possible for you. And then from there, you can really start to question identity itself. So I think that can be really valuable. And then, practices. There are all kinds of practices. Maybe you've done the same sort of meditation your whole life. Maybe you've always done Shikantaza. Maybe you've always done TM. Whatever. Try something different. Try something radically different. Try some somatic work. Try TRE. These things all can cause shifts. They can do all kinds of things. And then do emotion work. Like I often say, if somebody's really on fire with the Dharma, they just want to wake up, and they want to wake up now, like right now, and that's the only priority, then I don't worry about the shadow and emotion work stuff right away. That'll come later. But If you still feel some hesitation and you're not ready to just like swallow that red hot iron ball, look into the emotion space, because there may be something in there that just needed to be addressed, and it's just pulling too much of your attention toward it, and maybe you're ignoring it, or maybe you just haven't fully addressed it, or whatever. Could be really valuable to address that with a facilitator, with an energy worker, with a therapist, through inquiry. There's so many ways to do things. So do some work in the emotion spectrum. But the summary of what I want to say about all this is, number one, you have to confront identity at the level of thought initially, and your story, whatever your story is, including the story that says, I can't wake up. I know that seems almost like meta, but it's just so true. That's the story you're holding on to stay asleep, essentially. One way or another, you have to confront that. Find a way to do it. And you do have the ability to do it. And you will feel some stuff come up when you do this. Maybe fearful, maybe disorienting. It's going to happen, and it's okay, right? That's number one. Number two, there are plenty of techniques and practices. Try some. Do something different. Mix it up. Put yourself in uncomfortable situations with practice if that's what you've been avoiding. If you just can't afford to do an in-person retreat, it's just impossible for you to afford it, that's one thing. But if it's like, well, it's kind of expensive, I like to travel, and I don't know, my partner might not like it, but if you really ask yourself, like, can I actually do that? And the answer is yes, then go, like, do something, find a way to get yourself to, or even if it's online, if you can't afford it, just do it online. You can do it for almost free, right? But your mind might say, well, I have a week off. I don't want to spend the whole thing meditating, and I don't really do good with meditation. And again, confront those beliefs. Put yourself in an uncomfortable situation and see what happens. I've seen so many people come to retreats that have never been to retreat before. I've had people come to retreats who have never meditated before, and I was like seriously concerned, but they did awesome. And you're in a supported environment, and the whole environment is a whole bunch of people oriented toward waking up and continuing to wake up. That's very, very powerful. It's a very powerful intention. It changes the way people speak, what they talk about, how they sit, how they move. It changes the whole energetic of that collective. It's a really powerful thing. So I recommend it. And with all of that, I think, it'd be pretty hard not to wake up. If you really want to go after it, go after it. Let me know how that lands. I could probably unpack it more. There's more I could say about it, but the video's getting long already. And these are the things I see that I do kind of find to be the sticky areas and misperceptions and so forth. So hopefully that's helpful.